And welcome into another episode of the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Rhett Malamud here with Zach Malamud. Zach, how you doing this Monday evening?
I'm doing pretty well. We had a draft last night. It was a lot of fun, a lot of interesting picks, great picks, and questionable picks on the board. But I'm doing very well.
All right, so here's how it's going to go. We're going to break down the full first two rounds of our 12-man or 12-person, because there are women in this league as well, 12-person league, and break down the first two rounds in complete, and then we're going to break down the rest of our teams and kind of see how we did. So let's bring up the draft board here and take a little look here at the board. And we're going to give you guys a full look here just to take a little gander. And Zach, you had the first pick of the draft, and you didn't really hesitate at all. It was a pretty good prize for you picking Bijan Robinson. So just kind of take us through that.
Yeah, so I mean, I was thinking about this since about March. I really was. I knew at that point it was probably going to be Bijan Robinson as my pick. I have Justin Herbert and Justin Fields as my two quarterbacks, so I wasn't really interested too much in Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson at the top of the board. Bijan, running back was definitely a position I needed because Javonte went down last year. I definitely was going with Bijan Robinson 100%.
Yeah, I don't think there was too much hesitation for you. It is clear in a way Bijan Robinson is the top player on the board. So let's just move on to number two. And it came down to quarterbacks here. And, obviously that debate that we've been having back and forth about Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young and, team number two, Jenna, I think she made the right pick here.
Yeah, definitely. And she was a team that really needed a quarterback. She only had Joe Burrow and a couple of guys after that, Ryan Tannehill, Mitch Trubisky, questionable guys as their second quarterback, and needed a number two guy. And Bryce Young was the perfect pick. I thought he was the top quarterback on the board, and I think she made the right pick at number two.
Yeah, I think that this is a guy who probably could have a long NFL career. And I think that's why he would be picked over a guy like Anthony Richardson, who might not have that long of a career, but might get some points here in the first year or so. But I think that Carolina is building something, and so to me, Bryce Young is a good pick. He kind of reminds me of Justin Herbert, a little smaller, but same kind of style. Whereas Anthony Richardson, we'll get to him in a minute. It's more like a Lamar Jackson type. So now let's jump to the number three pick, and it was interesting here because it was a team who could have used a quarterback, but also really just couldn't pass up on the value of Gibbs.
Yeah, and it was an interesting one because Scott had Derek Carr and Kenny Pickett, and he has Jimmy Garoppolo as well. So he has three starting quarterbacks on his roster. His running backs, it's Najee Harris and then a ton of backup running backs. So he definitely needed to clean up at that position, did that as well later in the draft, and it was really a smart move here to grab the value of Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's going to be a really legit star in the NFL as he starts his career. A really talented running back that could do a bit of everything out of Alabama. I think this was the right pick just based on his needs at running back at number three.
And just to give the listeners some information, this is a league where you have two running backs and then three wide receivers, as well as a quarterback spot and a super flex spot. Hence, all the quarterbacks kind of moving up the board. But here, I think you really couldn't pass on Gibbs. Gibbs is going to have a ton of value over the years, and he's Alvin Kamara. Listen, that's the comp, and he's going to use his PPR points. This is also a PPR league. That's where I think he'll get a lot of help in the receiving work. And yeah, we've spoken about David Montgomery and the impact that he could have. I think that this was the right pick here for the long-term future of the Detroit Lions picking Gibbs.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Brett, it's up to you. That number four, and you took Anthony Richardson. Tell us why you took Richardson here.
Yeah, and so to me, it came down to point blank. It was the best value that was there on the board. I was at a spot where I had Geno Smith on my team. I also had Dak Prescott. Quickly realized what was going to happen the first couple picks, and so it allowed me to pivot. I actually did a trade where I actually got Jonathan Taylor, so now I can kind of run that read option, and whichever way it goes, whether Richardson hands it off to Taylor or he keeps it, I'm getting the points either way. That's pretty good. But Richardson for me, listen, he might not have the longest of careers, but again, he will score points, especially this first season, just on the rush. I'm not quite sure about his throwing ability, and yeah, he has an absolute cannon for an arm, but it's more so the accuracy that kind of scares me. We'll see if that ends up panning out. But to me, the value was on the board there, and I would have picked him over C.J. Stroud, which is where I landed on Richardson. So now we jump over to number 5, and it was Jared P. on the board, and he picked Jackson Smith-Njigba. What do you think about that pick?
So it was an interesting one because he could have gone with CJ Stroud here, and it was probably between Stroud and Jackson Smith-Njigba. And I think he made the right pick in the end because he has 2 starting quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts and Daniel Jones. He could have used a third that could have helped him out. His wide receivers are okay. He has a kind of a mix of guys with Christian Kirk, Cortland Sutton, and DJ Moore leading the way. But JSN is going to be a really solid wide receiver for years to come. I think it was the right pick here. But like I said, he could have gone either way with grabbing a really high-profile quarterback out of Ohio State or his wide receiver, CJ Stroud's wide receiver in JSN.
Yeah, there were quite a few heads turned last year when we did our startup draft where he took Jalen Hurts in the sixth pick of the draft. And, a lot of people were like, whoa, Jalen Hurts. And he nailed that one on the head. So, the fact that he has Hurts on his team, he has a guy like Daniel Jones where he actually picked Daniel Jones in the 13th round of the startup. That turned out to be a pretty good pick too. So I think he's got 2 solid quarterbacks right now. He can start to build around his wide receivers. And I think that Jackson Smith-Njigba, while this year he might be a number 3, there's also a chance he slides into that number 2 role. So I'm not declaring him a number 3 by any stretch. But it is a little crowded there. I think that he will have a really long career, though. I think it was the right pick there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we'll get to his team a little bit later with some other additions to those flex positions.
Yeah, so now we jump over to the next pick, and there was a trade. Teams flip-flopping picks so that, Justin can move up by 1, grab his guy. He grabbed Quentin Johnston. Listen, this is a guy who's a deep threat. He's, he was that in college. I think that that continues here, and he can grow with a young quarterback, Justin Herbert.
Yeah, and Justin's team was kind of a team that he didn't necessarily need a wide receiver. He has Devontae Adams, who just traded for Stephon Diggs, but he does add Quentin Johnston to his roster and just keeps adding to those pieces that he has at the running back and wide receiver position. Still a question mark at quarterback right now with Kyler Murray, his starting quarterback, injured. Tua Tagovailoa's health is always in question. But I think it's the right pick here with Quentin Johnston. A lot of value at wide receiver and can definitely do some dangerous things in this offense with Justin Herbert.
Yeah, and again, he kind of has a fully rounded team now. And so I think that kind of, putting Quentin Johnston in there, it allows him to, almost set himself up to take it early, and then eventually he can make a trade later in this season as he starts to go forward. But he later in the draft, as you can kind of see there, Colt McCoy took Bailey Zappi. So he grabbed some quarterbacks also just to kind of shore up the insurance. And that was done by allowing himself to take the wide receiver early. Then we go to the next pick. It was Freddie. He took C.J. Stroud. He falls to, 7? He falls to 7, and that was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, it is surprising to see CJ Stroud, who had made a lot of noise at Ohio State, coming out of college, was probably the number 2, maybe 3 guy on the board. He was the number 2 quarterback in the NFL draft, and the question was, okay, now he's going to Houston. Can he get the job done with the roster that he has constructed around him? It's not as strong as people would have liked in his first year. However, if you could get CJ Stroud, a young quarterback, at 7, I mean, that's an absolute steal in the first round, especially for a team who needs a quarterback. His starting quarterbacks right now, Matt Stafford and Brock Purdy, and then Mac Jones right behind that. So he definitely needed a quarterback. I think Stroud was an absolute steal, like I said, in the first round.
Yeah, I think this was a slam dunk. I mean, just to get a quarterback who was picked at the very top of the NFL draft at 7, I think that that's a steal. That said, we've spoken about Stroud on this podcast before and how the Houston Texans will develop over the years. I think that they'll grab a wide receiver probably next year in the draft. But there's no schlubs as their wide receivers. They had a pretty good group to begin with, and it's a higher floor. It might not be as high of a ceiling, but the floor is high just in terms of reliability for CJ Stroud to be able to throw to some weapons.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so now we jump to the next pick, and it was Will, and he kind of was able to take that next best receiver on the board, looking for a receiver. He takes Zay Flowers. What do you think of this pick?
So it was an interesting one. He could have gone a couple of different ways here. I think Zay Flowers, where he fell, was the right pick. He doesn't need quarterbacks, Will. He has Patrick Mahomes and Trevor Lawrence. His running backs are still a question mark. A lot of injuries and question marks with Breece Hall and Saquon Barkley. He did add some running backs later. We'll talk about that. But at this moment, I think Zay Flowers was the right pick here. You could have gone either way, most likely with Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison. Maybe the rumors pulled him away from Jordan Addison with all that's going on off the field. I think Zay Flowers is a smart pick here at 8.
Yeah, I think the Addison thing from this past week definitely pushed him down the board. And for me, Zay Flowers, listen, he could have taken a running back, but at the same time, I'm not sure that I would have taken a guy like Charbonnet or Achane or Kendre Miller up high like that. The only way he could have taken that is obviously to trade down. That said, I think that he's probably set at quarterback for the next decade or so with Mahomes and with Lawrence. So I think that that's not really a worry. And his running backs aren't schlubs either. He's got Miles Sanders, Saquon Barkley, and Breece Hall. And so, to start to build around those wide receivers, I think this was the right pick for him. And I think that Zay Flowers will have a good career.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so now we had another one, and it was a trade. It was basically a draft and trade, but the pick was Dalton Kincaid. It was traded to Chuck, but let's just talk about the pick in general here. Dalton Kincaid and the value that he can bring to the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, Dalton Kincaid, we've talked about him a couple of weeks, and you mentioned, Brett, that this guy is basically a wide receiver. I mean, you can slot him in as a wide receiver, and he's going to do everything as that most likely number 2 option up in Buffalo in just his rookie year. Very talented tight end out of Utah, and will definitely have an impact heading into the season. Definitely a smart pick at number 9. I think he was the best available clearly at that time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's a cheat code when you can put a guy of that size out at wide receiver. Yes, there's the question marks about the rookie tight ends and stuff. I'm not sure that there's going to be too many question marks about Dalton Kincaid, especially based on the fact that there's kind of noise out there that he might be utilized as the second option behind Diggs. Now, this was a trade. It was traded to Chuck, who had Dawson Knox on his team, and it went to a quarterback-needy team in exchange for Kirk Cousins. I think the trade works out for both sides, and so Dalton Kincaid, though, good pick there at that slot. We move on to the next slot, and it was at the 10th pick that Will Levis went off the board. I don't know that it was too early for Will Levis, just based on the fact that this is another guy that could potentially have a long career.
So, yeah, Jack's team didn't necessarily need a quarterback, which was interesting, but it's a great pick. I mean, he dropped all the way to 10, and you can we say this a lot. You can never have enough quarterbacks in a Superflex Dynasty League. Like, you can never have enough. Just keep grabbing them, and a couple of them can pan out. He also has some older quarterbacks in Russell Wilson. Jared Goff's getting a little bit up there in age, and then he has Lamar Jackson as his number 1 guy. So now his quarterbacks are completely set, and he's focusing on adding to those flex positions, running back, wide receiver, tight end. But to grab Will Levis, and yes, he's not going to be the starter right away, but to grab him at the 10th pick is a really strong pick.
Yeah, this is the one that actually caught me by surprise because you mentioned it. He has Lamar Jackson and he has Russell Wilson. So I wasn't necessarily thinking that he would take a quarterback. You'll see that I had the next 2 picks after some trades. But to me, Will Levis right here was the highest value. And if Jack didn't take him at that pick, I would have taken him with the next pick. I just believe that the floor is high for Levis. And yes, there's the potential that he doesn't get in right away. But at the same time, there's the potential that he comes in right away or he comes in a couple weeks in if the Titans don't do too well. And then he's got DeAndre Hopkins as his number one receiver. I think that that's something to look at there.
Yeah, Brett, and you traded in the last couple of weeks. You got 2 first rounders to end the first round. Jordan Addison, Zach Charbonnet. Take us through both of them.
Yeah, so just breaking down the trades quickly, I flipped a couple receivers. Christian Watson was on his way out, as well as Geno Smith. I brought back in Jonathan Taylor, who's coming off an off year. But I also got that pick, and I think that allowed me to almost replace Christian Watson with another receiver, and that's Jordan Addison. Addison's in a good spot right now. He's the number 2 receiver. Adam Thielen's not there anymore, so I was a little comfortable with the Addison role. Obviously, what transpired over the last week with him with the speeding incident, we'll see if anything comes about with it in terms of a suspension or a fine or something like that. He did apologize for it, so I wasn't too concerned picking him there at pick 11. Hopefully it all works out, and I have a good receiver going forward. As far as the second pick goes, it was Zach Charbonnet. This was a pick I traded Isaiah Pacheco for, or actually I believe it was the pick before. But point being, I got rid of Isaiah Pacheco as part of that deal, and so it was about restocking the cupboard and grabbing the best available value at that point. So I thought Charbonnet. Listen, the landing spot is awful. Horrendous. The talent is through the roof. I think that he's going to be a good running back. Right now, it's just about how high is the ceiling for him, which is why he fell to the very end of the first round with Kenneth Walker there. I'm not too sure that the ceiling's very high at this very moment, but the second that a guy like a Kenneth Walker goes down, it's a workhorse back. And I could say the same that if Charbonnet goes down, Kenneth Walker is a workhorse back. And so to me, I really couldn't pass that up at that spot. It was just best player available for me, honestly. Jumping over to the second round, though. Oh, go ahead. Jump.
Yeah, and Brett, I'm just saying quickly, with Richardson, you needed a quarterback, so you grabbed Richardson, and now you're at a point with your team. You made a couple of trades, and I think you're just adding to the roster to try and go for a win maybe this year.
Yeah, I think that listen, when the Jonathan Taylor trade went through, I also acquired Jameson Williams earlier in the offseason, a guy who's suspended for the start of the year, but could have him for the back half of this season. It almost transitioned the team in from that middle of the road to the win now. And so again, it was about trying to get the absolute best value, what can make the biggest impact for me this year. And that's kind of why I leaned in the way that I did. But jump into the second round, you picked up a guy with the first pick who probably could have a big impact this year. We spoke about him a ton over the last few weeks. It was Sam Laporta.
I was gonna say, if you watched recent episodes and you heard me talk about Sam Laporta, draft Sam Laporta, whatever you do, you got to draft him. He's rated so low, underrated, the whole deal. And I got him at the 13th pick, first pick in the second round. This was a lock for me. If he fell, I was 100%. It did not matter who was on the board. I was taking Sam Laporta. That was the guy I was going for. I needed a tight end. I lost a couple throughout last season, and then I only had Dalton Schultz during this offseason. So I definitely needed tight ends. I grabbed another one later. We'll talk about it. But Sam Laporta clearly was my pick here. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and TJ Hawkinson comes to mind immediately. Just that role. And, I think that he's going to have a really good career and a really good season, a rookie year for Sam Laporta. So, it was the right pick at that point. I'll be honest, I looked at Laporta for about half a second, couldn't pass up that value with the previous 2 picks. If Kincaid obviously fell, I would have taken Kincaid over Laporta. But at the same time, Laporta is going to be really, really good. So you got a really good pick with the first pick of the second round. Which is a good value. So moving on to the next pick, it was Jenna. She took a running back here. It was Kendre Miller. And so there was a little bit of debate here on who that next running back is. Jenna picked Kendre Miller. You could have argued that it was also Devon Achane, who came a couple picks after that. But listen, the Alvin Kamara situation might change things here.
Yeah, it definitely can. And Kendre Miller is a beast of a running back. Really showed that at TCU in college last season. And it's a strong pick here. I think reached a little bit probably, I would say he was ranked like 5 or 6 picks lower than where he got drafted, but she didn't have a pick till the next round, till 12 picks later. So if you want a guy, you got to go get him. And she did that. It's a strong pick. And like you said, if Kamara's misses any time this season, Kendre Miller paired with Jamal Williams could be a really lethal duo down in New Orleans.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't work out this year, that's somebody that you can stash right on your roster, and in the next year or so, he'll take off. And so I think that also was a good pick at that spot.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so now I think the next best player available was picked in that next pick. It was Michael Mayer, the tight end out of Las Vegas. Zach, take us through this one that Scott made.
Yeah, so Scott grabbed Michael Mayer. I think it's a great pick. He needed a tight end in this draft if he could get one. Mike Gesicki and Tyler Higbee are his tight ends. Two maybe inconsistent guys. Gesicki is now paired with Hunter Henry up in New Orleans, so might not get what he was able to do in Miami. And then Tyler Higbee had a great season last year, but now Cooper Kupp is coming back, and some of those targets can go away from Higbee. I think Michael Mayer can fit in to that Las Vegas offense very well. It is a bit crowded there. We've talked about that a couple of times. OJ Howard is there, and Austin Hooper is another addition for Las Vegas. So it could be crowded, but for the future, Michael Mayer is definitely a good pick here.
Yeah, listen, there's a lot of people out there that are saying that he is going to have the best tight end career of any of the three that were picked. And you kind of can't pass that up. Again, it was the best player available. I think Mayer will have a good career. So to me, there really was no debate when he was on the clock right there and he was left on the board.
Yep, definitely.
So now we jump to the next pick, and it was originally mine. I traded out because I didn't think any of those tight ends would have been available at that spot, Kincaid, Laporta, or Mayer, which prompted me to trade out. Chuck traded in, and he picked a quarterback. Listen, he was a quarterback-needy team. He had Deshaun Watson and Geno Smith, and he goes out and he picks Hendon Hooker. And I think that, to me, it's a smart pick just from the standpoint of you grabbed a quarterback. He wasn't picking again until the 4th round, and so go get your guy, and he got him.
That's exactly what I was going to say. He did not have a lot of early round picks, and the one early round pick, a quarterback needy team, and we talk about you need those quarterbacks in Superflex Dynasty, and he grabbed the guy in Hendon Hooker who could in the future end up being the starter in Detroit once Jared Goff's out the door. Hendon Hooker had a fantastic senior season, obviously cut short with that torn ACL at Tennessee last year, trying to get back from that, but he can definitely in a couple of years end up being the starter in Detroit. Smart pick here for a quarterback needy team.
Yeah, and I mean the drop-off rate after Hendon Hooker as a quarterback, it just, it's way, way lower. And so to me, again, go get your guy. I think the pick made sense. Jumping to the next pick, it was Luke Musgrave, the tight end out of Green Bay. Another good pick here, but to me, Tucker Kraft comes in also. We're not really sure who the guy is. Tucker Kraft was not selected at all in this draft, the 3rd rounder for Green Bay. But listen, Musgrave's a pretty good player here. What do you think?
So it was interesting, this one, and I've questioned Jared P's picks a couple of times so far today. I think it's a good pick. I definitely do. Just based on the talent that Luke Musgrave's going to bring, he could end up being the number 1 or the number 2. There's still a question mark there at tight end in Green Bay. But I feel like there's a couple guys, just a couple of picks after, that I thought at first that he was going to take, one of Achane or Rice or even Tajay Spears. I think one of those guys could have been maybe one of his options. He went with Luke Musgrave. He has Zach Ertz, who's injured. We don't know when he's going to come back, and Pat Freiermuth as well. So very young group with Freiermuth and Musgrave now. So he's pretty set at tight end. I can't say it's a bad pick with Musgrave there.
No, I don't think so. I think it was a good pick. The only question mark that I really had was, that they did pick one in the 2nd round, one in the 3rd round, Green Bay. And so we're not exactly sure what the roles will end up being. And then, of course, they picked Jaden Reed also in the 2nd round, which he got picked a couple picks later as well. I wasn't too sure on the value, but at the same time, with the Ertz injury, I can understand that he picked for need. Can't always fault him for that as well. because there is the chance that, listen, Jordan Love likes throwing to the tight ends, and then all of a sudden this move pans out. I can't question Jared because he's had so many good picks. And so we've kind of gone, what? And then that guy's gone off. So can't question that pick. We jumped
I was
to
going to say Luke
yeah,
Musgrave is going to be the tight end of the draft all of a sudden.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, because that's just kind of how it works with some of these GMs here. So we jump to the next pick, and to me, again, best player available was a guy who could have gone at the top of the second round. He falls to the 6th pick of the second round. Is Devon Achane.
I was going to say, I was pretty shocked that he fell this far, Devon Achane, just how much noise he's made so far in the offseason. I was expecting him to be right there in the early second round. Could have been right after my pick. I said I was going to lock down Laporta there with the first pick in the second round, but any of those picked after, I think Achane, I was expecting him to go there. He fell a little bit far, and Freddie ends up getting a really strong running back who could end up, it's crazy to say, could end up being the number 1 running back in Miami this season. Raheem Mostert's still a question mark. Jeff Wilson Jr. is a question mark. Dalvin Cook was making noise that he might go to Miami, but has had some trouble off the field now. I think Devon Achane could end up being the number 1 this season, Brett.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie. This is a guy that at the 12th pick, I was debating between him and Charbonnet. And so for him to go that many picks later, I think this is also a steal. Achane, to me, yes, just based on the fact that the other 2 running backs in Miami haven't been able to stay healthy throughout their careers. I think that there is an opportunity that Achane could end up as the number 1, especially when the coach bangs the table for you to get picked.
Yeah, definitely. And he needed a couple of running backs, Freddie, with Kareem Hunt now going into free agency. A lot of question marks there. The debate in Chicago with Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson. He has Khalil Herbert, so that's still a question mark behind his top 2 in Nick Chubb and James Conner.
Yeah, so now we jump to the next pick, and it was you back on the clock as you were the owner of the second round, as I had 3 first-rounders. But you didn't really hesitate with this one either. I think that there was no debate. I think you were ecstatic that Rashee Rice fell into your lap.
So Rashee Rice, it was my top option before the draft. I didn't know if he was going to fall. I was hoping and praying that he would. It ended up panning out for me. But if he did, I was going to jump on him because I think he's a really strong wide receiver, probably the top wide receiver that was available in the second round, clearly in my mind. He's heading to Kansas City. I've talked about him a couple times, saying that he could end up replacing Juju Smith-Schuster's role as that number 1 wide receiver in Kansas City. And he's been making noise already today. Brett, you sent me something earlier of Rashee Rice doing stuff in training camp and really making a connection with Patrick Mahomes. I think there's a very big pick that I made here to add to some of my wide receiver depth that was lacking before the draft.
Yeah, listen, I was saying it earlier today. There were 3 guys who were personally requested to be drafted by their quarterbacks. The first one was Tank Dell, who got requested to be drafted in Houston. The second one was Jonathan Mingo. Bryce Young banged the table for him, his quarterback. And then it was Rashee Rice. And you don't really hesitate when Pat Mahomes says you need to go get this guy and he's a receiver. Kansas City didn't hesitate, so they grabbed him. I think that this is going to be the guy. Pat Mahomes absolutely loves throwing to him early, and you can see he's testing the waters of where he can throw and how far he can throw and things like that. I think that this could be the beginning of a good partnership with Pat Mahomes, and I think that that's a really good pick for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I needed wide receiver depth desperately heading into this draft. That was one of my focus.
Yeah, and you picked one a couple picks later. We'll get to that in just a second. But in between it was Will, and he picked Tajay Spears. And I think that this, again, was a really good pick. We just spoke about Breece Hall and Saquon Barkley. He gets the running back here, and it's a guy who could eventually take over for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and Tajay Spears is a really strong running back out of Tulane. Had a great season last year, surprised a lot of people. I think it was actually a good pick here by Will, because I think Tajay Spears, I expected him to go maybe a couple of picks before that. But then as those guys, Devon Achane and Rashee Rice fell, then Tajay Spears fell with them. I think it's a really strong pick here for Will, who needs running backs, like I mentioned before. The question marks about Breece Hall and Saquon Barkley heading into the season. He grabs Tajay Spears, who could have an impact. They may not give Derrick Henry the full workload this season in Tennessee.
Yeah, this was one of those guys that I thought that Jared P might have considered. To me, that this guy again, he has that PPR value as well, and so I think there's going to be a lot of screen game, a lot of dump offs when they need to give Henry a rest, and from going in between the tackles. I think that's kind of how they're going to use Spears here. Good pick for Will.
Definitely.
So now it had you back on the clock and best player available. I think you were really excited to have both of these receivers with Rashee Rice and now Marvin Mims.
So it was a big question mark. We had 5 minutes on the clock, I think, or 3 minutes on the clock. I went almost the full 3 minutes thinking about Marvin Mims or Jaden Reed. It was a toss up in my mind. The difference for me is I have Romeo Doubs on my team. So I was leaning that I want to root for Romeo Doubs, and it would be difficult for me to have both Reed and Dobbs on my team. I went to Mims, and Mims is also still 21 years old. Jaden Reed is 23 years old. And I said, yes, that doesn't matter too much, but why not? I'll take the chance. And I took Marvin Mims. Like I talked about, I needed wide receiver depth, and I get a second really strong rookie wide receiver in Marvin Mims that I think could end up being the third or fourth guy easily in this rookie season. Cortland Sutton, then Jerry Jeudy are there. Still a question if Tim Patrick's going to fill back in as that number 3. I think there's a good chance that Marvin Mims could take that number 3 spot.
Yeah, again, I think this is one of those lower risk kind of picks here, back end of the second round that you traded into, and it was the best player. I think that Mims will have a good career. And again, he has a good quarterback throwing him the ball. Yes, he's coming off of a bad season, but at the same time, I don't think that you could have passed up on the value of Mims and what Mims could be, especially if they start to move on from a couple of those receivers.
Yeah, definitely. And then the next pick was Jaden Reed. So I expected that to go, but Jack gets a wide receiver in Jaden Reed who has a ton of talent heading up to, you would probably say, a crowded maybe room up in Green Bay with the tight ends and now the wide receivers. A lot of guys up there.
Yeah, I mean, he's got Watson, he's got Dobbs, and now it's him. And they picked 2 tight ends, as we just spoke about before. And so, yeah, it is a little crowded. That said, the talent, you can't deny it as well. And this is a good flyer for that second round. I think he's a guy that could make an impact. He'll be available right over the middle in the slot. And, I think that, between the three-headed monster, they'll probably end up playing a lot of 3 wide receiver sets as well in Green Bay. So I'm excited to see how Jaden Reed does, and I think it was a good pick at that spot.
And Brett, we always talk about the fan impact on it. Jack, being a Packers fan, definitely made this pick so easy in the second round.
Yeah, and listen, it's always fun to root for your guys, and so it makes sense. He can root for Jaden Reed every week to score a touchdown, and it's a double whammy when your team scores and your fantasy player scores.
Exactly.
So now we had the back end of the second round, and we ended here with a back-to-back pick. And he went wide, and he went running back. It was Scotty. He takes Jonathan Mingo, and he takes Tank Bigsby. Zach, take us through both of these guys.
So I think these are 2 strong picks. I think best available guys. You could have gone either way with the second one with Tank Bigsby, and maybe some guys behind him, Roschon Johnson around there too. But Mingo was definitely the top guy on the board. I said it was between those 2 in the end, Mims and Reed. Mingo was in that conversation. Those 3 wide receivers, I knew they would be there. I ended up pushing Mingo out a little bit just based on the question marks heading into his rookie season with Young, and that Carolina system worried me a little bit. But Mingo's going to be a strong player if he can build that relationship and chemistry with Bryce Young at quarterback. So it was a good pick here. Late second round, it's a really strong pick with Mingo all the way back there. And then Tank Bigsby, there's still a question mark of ETN, and is he going to continue as that number 1 workhorse type back? I don't know if he is. Tank Bigsby was really good at Auburn last season and the last couple of years, and is a very strong, powerful running back who could get some goal line touches if it comes down to that in Jacksonville this season. And that was a strong pick. Like I said, you could have gone either way with Bigsby or some of the other running backs behind him, but I think Bigsby is a smart play here.
So for me, it was interesting because when I first was targeting at that first spot, which is the fourth pick of the second round, Mingo was one of my big targets. And so I think that that's a great pick at the very end of the round. I think that he's going to have a good impact. He can grow with a rookie, and I think that's a really helpful thing. I also really think that being with Adam Thielen and learning from him is going to be extremely helpful for his career as well. So I think that Jonathan Mingo was a really good pick there. And for me, Tank Bigsby, listen, it reminds me almost of like what they wanted James Robinson to be before the injury. It's that between the tackles back, and I think that it's going to be a really good change of pace when they're going back and forth between him and ETN. So another really, really good pick, I think, there for Scott.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so now we're just going to kind of bounce around to the rest of our picks, and we don't have a pick until the very back end of the third round. Zach trading away his third round pick, but I had back-to-back picks, and to me, it was best player available, point blank, just kind of waiting to see who falls. I really wanted to get Josh Downs at that spot. He goes to the pick right before me, which I wasn't too thrilled about, but at the same time, I'll take the consolation prize. John Mechie, coming off of a season that he did not play in. It would have been his rookie year, coming off of leukemia. And now he's fully healthy. He's, hopefully going to make some noise this year. And to me, it was like, listen, I don't always agree with picking waivers in a rookie waiver draft, but at the same time, to me, he wasn't a waiver. He was a rookie. He hasn't played a game. And so you kind of just are throwing that lottery ticket. You don't really know what it's going to be. Not a ton of guys in Houston, not a ton of big competition for him. And so I kind of said, why not? The second pick was Zach Evans. Again, it was best player available. It also had a factor in that I have Cam Akers on my team, a little bit of insurance there. And Zach Evans, a potential backup for the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, and John Mechie, I actually picked him last year. One of my last picks in the draft. I knew he was diagnosed with leukemia. I was going to stash him on there, and then it came down to one point in the season where I had to drop him to grab another guy. But this guy, I mean, in rookie drafts last year, he was a second rounder, early second rounder, John Mechie, and had a very talented career at Alabama. He could definitely make some noise. This is, like you said, Brett, his rookie year, and can definitely have an impact in this young offense with Stroud running things, and could build that relationship with Stroud. Him and Tank Dell as well, the two rookies, you would say, coming in. It was a smart pick there as he dropped that far in the third round. And then Zach Evans, like you mentioned, grabbing that insurance for Cam Akers. You can never go bad with that by grabbing that handcuff guy maybe behind your top running back.
Yeah, to me, it was kind of what you said, where last year's rookie draft, he was at the very top of that second round. And to me, that was too much value to pass up at that spot. And so, while I was disappointed to not get Josh Downs, probably would have picked Downs and Mechie if I'm going to be honest. But at the same time, I was okay with picking Zach Evans there just from the insurance policy.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so then we go to the next pick, and it was you. And this was your final pick of the draft, and you took a tight end here. And so just kind of take us through, after taking Sam Laporta, what kind of went into your head?
So this one was purely based off that I was very shocked that Luke Schoonmaker fell all the way to the first pick of the fourth round. I know there's question marks just based on his size, Luke Schoonmaker, compared to a guy like Jake Ferguson, and they may use Schoonmaker more as a blocking tight end in Dallas. But I do think Luke Schoonmaker showed in college what he can do. And I think if I was able to grab him first pick of the fourth round, I was definitely going to pounce on him. It took me a little bit because I was also interested in some of the free agents and the waivers that were on the board. Actually, my next guy was Rashid Shaheed, who then went to the next team in Jenna. So I ended up getting Schoonmaker. He's a rookie. He's young, and like I said, there's still a question mark of who's going to be the number one. Schoonmaker has a very valid shot to be the number one tight end in a pass-heavy offense under Dak Prescott in Dallas.
Yeah, to me, it was the best player available on the board at that spot. I think that taking the lottery ticket, because that's what these third and fourth and fifth rounders are in these kinds of drafts. Taking the lottery ticket that he will be the starter. Dallas loves to throw to the tight end. They've had good tight end production over the years, and there's the potential that he is that guy. And so, to me, it was the best player available. Yes, Rashid Shaheed would have been a good pick there, but I think that you couldn't really pass up the value.
Yeah, and I talked about my wide receiver depth. I also needed some at tight end, and I already drafted Laporta to pair with Dalton Schultz. And then, I mean, why not get another one in Luke Schoonmaker if he drops that far?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, it was a good draft for both of us. As I pull up here, both of our teams and how we kind of laid out. And here we go. As you kind of see, both of our rosters. And what our full rosters are. And so just kind of break down your roster, Zach, and what you think your outlook is on your team now that the draft is complete. We do have cut day coming up. The way that we do it in our league is that you have to cut back down to 21 players. And so as you see there, Zach's going to have to cut 7 guys out of this long list based on some prior trades. Just a few weeks ago, I'm only going to have to cut down 5, making a couple 2-for-1 deals. But Zach, just take us through your roster.
So yeah, my quarterbacks are set with Herbert and Fields for the next 10 years, I hope. If those guys are still moving along with their respective teams, and then Jacoby Brissett, still a question mark of how Sam Howell is going to do. I'm keeping Jacoby Brissett just to back those two up. But it is a super flexi league, not a 2-quarterback league. So once it comes to the bye week, I might as well just go with a flex player instead of having Jacoby Brissett if he's not playing. My running backs, I'm definitely going to need to cut down on those. There's a lot of them there, a lot of random guys that definitely will be on the waiver wire once it comes cut day for us in this Dynasty League. My wide receivers, I wanted to add depth. I didn't have a strong firepower. I think with Garrett Wilson, probably the top guy. I think then you look at Hollywood Brown and Rashad Bateman, still some question marks with those two teams as their quarterbacks. And then Romeo Doubs may have a great season. We don't know under Jordan Love. But then adding Rashee Rice and Marvin Mims to that definitely helped boost that wide receiver room for me. And then I talked about the 2 tight ends. I needed a tight end, maybe 2 of them, and I got them in Laporta and Schoonmaker, and everything else after that. Tyler Bass, baby, ride him. He's the Buffalo kicker. I love him.
Yeah, so for your roster, I mean, I'll just kind of go through it. At your quarterback position, you said it. I think that, having Herberts and Fields together, you hope and pray that the running quarterback stays healthy for a long time. But I think you got a really good one in Herbert and a really good one in Fields. And so, that there's an interesting one there. You're a little top heavy at running back, but that's okay. You kind of filled in. Obviously, you got Bijan, and so that was a pretty good prize to be the worst team in the league. And so now you got Javonte coming off injury. We'll see how that ends up going. But then you got Alexander Madison, which was kind of a little bit of a surprise this offseason with the Dalvin move. I think that you kind of set yourself up with some number ones there. And you got some good depth pieces, some young running backs. Kyron Williams, we'll see what happens with that. Zamir White, we'll see what happens with him as well. You got the Bijan insurance policy already in Tyler Algier after a previous trade, knowing that you were going to take Bijan. So I thought that was a smart move as well. And then I kind of think that your wides are pretty stacked right now with, Bateman's going on. He just got announced that he was placed on the PUP list. But, between Garrett Wilson, Marquise Brown, Rashee Rice, Marvin Mims, Dobbs, and then after all of those guys, you first have Michael Gallup. I think that's a great core that you can build off of. And so as you start to build your team, I think that you're kind of in that spot where you can almost take the next step. And then you got some pretty good tight ends too. You grabbed 2 of them in this draft, as well as Dalton Schultz, who just signed in Houston. I think those are a good move. And yeah, you said that Tyler Bass, that's a pretty reliable kicker you got there. And you got some pretty reliable defenses as well. The Patriots always a pretty good defense, and the Rams of course, they got some great pieces on their defense. Can't go wrong with them.
Just quickly, Brett, and I look at my team, and my goal was to grab young pieces and grab young and upcoming guys. I don't think there's a guy on my team that's really younger than the age of 26, 27 right now.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to be a thing that kind of helps you move forward, especially as you have to almost maneuver, try to make trades, things like that. I think having those younger pieces is a very attractive way to get somebody else's attention when it comes to trade offers.
Definitely. And let's move on to your team, Brett, and take us through your roster.
Yeah, so at quarterback, it was a little iffy a couple weeks ago. It was Dak Prescott, it was Geno Smith, and then it was a couple of these transition guys. We're not really sure what the future holds for Trey Lance and whether he's going to be named the starter or not, whether Brock Purdy's going to come back healthy. Zach Wilson obviously just lost his starting job to Aaron Rodgers coming in, and then Jameis Winston, he sticks around in New Orleans instead of going somewhere else, even with Derek Carr there. And so it should be interesting to see what happens with his future as well. And then I kind of had to maneuver once I figured out what the board might lay out. And I flipped out Geno and brought in Anthony Richardson. So I thought I did pretty well there. Running backs, listen, I have, Jonathan Taylor. You can't really go wrong with Jonathan Taylor as your number one. Cam Akers, a number two. And then we spoke about Montgomery and what his impact might be with Gibbs. So I think I got really, really strong at running back. James Cook as well. And then, of course, I added Charbonnet at the back end of the first round. And so, there's some developmental pieces there as well. Devin Singletary, and we'll see what his impact is with, the thorn in the side of Pierce. And then Isaiah Spiller and whether or not he can step up as the backup, as well as Zach Evans as the backup to Cam Akers. And then it was kind of interesting because I really thought that I was going to be an offseason where I almost subtracted a lot at wides, and I really only subtracted Christian Watson, who came off a really good year. Yes, he lost Aaron Rodgers. I still think he's going to have a really good year this coming year with Jordan Love. But at the same time, I bring in Jamison Williams, and so he's a young piece. CeeDee Lamb and A.J. Brown are pretty elite options when it comes to Dynasty, especially because they're both really young. Same with Drake London, who didn't exactly prove himself, but at the same time, it's another developmental piece. We'll see if he can take the next step, going to a new quarterback this year. And then it's Mike Williams, and it's a little bit iffy on Mike Williams' future right now. They draft a wide receiver. Keenan Allen and him are restructured contracts a bit. There were rumors that they could potentially cut him, and they didn't. And then the rumors got even louder for Keenan Allen. And so that's a bit of a question mark. I'm not too worried about what's going to happen this year, though. It's kind of that win now mentality when it comes to wides, and I think that it's pretty stacked. And then there's Michael Thomas. Listen, Michael Thomas is a good receiver, and if he could stay healthy, that's a good piece as well. Wouldn't discount him. And then, listen, I told you I took the lottery ticket on John Mechie, grabbed what I think would be a sure thing. Obviously, the last week might have changed things with Jordan Addison. We'll see, if he can get his head straight. But, the talent is there. He's the number 2 receiver behind Jefferson. So I think it was a really good move there to take him to almost shore up the wide receivers. So again, I added at receiver where I really thought that I was going to subtract, which was interesting. Goddard, he's, top 10 tight end, easy. You could even say like top 6 or 7. And then there's Trey McBride. And listen, Trey McBride, we'll see what happens with Ertz and that situation. It's a guy who can make some impact for Arizona, especially if Ertz is not ready, where he kind of proved himself. Defense, I always kind of try to go with the most reliable defense. And so I picked the Bills. I picked the Ravens. Historically, the Ravens have had a good defense every year. The Bills, within the last 5 years, have had a really good defense. So that was kind of what my thought was there. Probably won't change that up. And then it's Will Lutz, and we spoke about him last week. I think that this is going to be a big year for Will Lutz, and to have him on that team is a bit of a sleeper for me.
Yeah, and Brett, looking at your quarterbacks, and you add Anthony Richardson, you really had your choice between Richardson and Stroud, and you take Richardson, who has a very high ceiling heading into his NFL career, and now you add him to really your 2 starters in Dak Prescott and maybe a question mark in Trey Lance. But if Trey Lance, for some reason, is not the starter this year, you still have a very packed roster of running backs and wide receivers that in that bye week, you can plug one of those guys into that super flex spot. But then looking at your running backs that you added to them with Charbonnet and Evans, but Cam Akers had a great end to last season. We'll see if he can continue that into this season. Montgomery, we talk about the touchdowns that he could get behind Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit. And then James Cook's in a crowded backfield, but very young, a lot of potential up in Buffalo. And then you also have Jonathan Taylor now that you added, plus Devin Singletary, who could also get some touchdowns next to Dameon Pierce. But Jonathan Taylor, the big trade of the offseason, you would have to say, for your team to grab Jonathan Taylor after an off year, a very buy low type of candidate, and you were able to get him plus a first-round pick, which I was a little bit shocked that you were able to pull that off, a really good trade from you. And then you go to wide receiver and you added to that too with Addison and John Mechie. But you know your top two guys in CeeDee Lamb and A.J. Brown are most likely going to be your guys for the next 5 to 10 years, and those reliable guys. And then you filled out with very young pieces who have a lot of potential with Addison, like I mentioned, as well as now Jamison Williams and Drake London, even though it hasn't been the greatest start to his career in Atlanta. And then, of course, at tight end, you're set with Goddard and McBride. McBride most likely going to take over once Ertz is out the door in Arizona. And then you talk about your defenses. The Bills have been dominant over the last 5 years. And then the Ravens struggled a lot last year, lost a couple of guys in the offseason, but will definitely pick it up as a strong defensive team in the last decade or so. And then Will Lutz, sleeper of the kickers, like we talked about. It's a very well-rounded team, very young, plus those guys at the top of the board for your team, and it could be a year to go for it for you.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where it lies. And again, it goes back to that Jonathan Taylor trade. And to me, listen, anybody who's playing in a Superflex league will know, and for those who haven't, will find out quickly. Quarterbacks are gold in this. If you don't have a quarterback, you're not going to be able to make any noise. And so to me, it took for Geno Smith to have a really good career year. Again, he was basically announced that he's not going to be replaced this year because they didn't pick a quarterback early in the draft. And then there's noise that he's going to stick around for a couple more years. And I think that that's true. I buy that. And so to be able to trade a known commodity, you know what you're getting. He has a ton of weapons now. They bring in Charbonnet. They have Walker. They bring in Jackson Smith and Jigba. The Seattle Seahawks have a ton of weapons around him. I think that really elevated the value of Geno Smith. And then, listen, I had to give up a really good young receiver in Christian Watson, who had a really good year as well. And I did give up a third-round pick to be able to move up as well. And so, yes, to make that trade, it was awesome to be able to get a first-round pick. That said, it was the last pick of the first round, so it was almost like the first pick of the second round. That said, to be able to give up a quarterback, I think that's what propelled that move to go forward. And it just kind of goes back to show that like quarterbacks are king, especially in Superflex.
Yeah, and just your final trade that you made was also Isaiah Pacheco, in which then you jumped up into the first round with another pick, and you basically replaced him with Zach Charbonnet, who can definitely have a good career up in Seattle. A question mark of who's going to be the number one. Are they going to just be side by side, Kenneth Walker III and Zach Charbonnet? But Charbonnet has a lot of potential heading into this year and his career. A very powerful running back out of UCLA, did a lot in college, and Seattle wouldn't have picked him in the second round if they didn't believe in him. He could definitely have a good career up north.
Yeah, and again, like I spoke about before, I'm not sure how high the ceiling was. And for the team that I traded against, which was Doug and Jared, they pick up Isaiah Pacheco, who, he had a really strong end to his year, middle to end of the year. And, they really didn't have to maneuver that much. Yes, they gave up the 11th pick. They only had to give up a third rounder that was 35th overall in the draft. But in exchange, they got Pacheco, they got the 25th, and then they got an extra fifth rounder. And so for them, it totally made sense because I would totally take Pacheco this season over Charbonnet just based on the ceiling alone. They didn't think they were going to get that kind of a player at 11, and so they went and got the known commodity in Isaiah Pacheco. So I think it was a smart move for them as well.
Yeah, definitely a fair trade in the end.
So that'll do it for us for this week. We're going to start to get into more redraft as we head into redraft season into August, and training camps opening for the most part this Wednesday for the bulk of the teams. And, some have already opened. It should be really exciting to see. We're going to start to hear about a lot of holdouts. We'll start to hear about injury reports. We'll break it all down, and we're going to start to do a couple previews into the redraft of where you guys should target different players. And, we might go into like values of each round. I think that's going to be what we're going to focus on next, is what is the best value in each round. Until then, Zach, you got any last words?
No, draft season is finally here, Brad. I love it.
Yeah, very excited for draft season and for fantasy football and in general to come up. Until the next one, Brett Malwood and Zach.